Jerusalem, for many people, is all about the politics, but today in Brussels, it's all about the business. Joining me today is Petros Ostrovicius, Lithuanian MEP from the Liberals, Alex Benjamin, European Jewish Association, and Dana Holstein-Mann, Director of Innovation at Pediatric Rehabilitation Hospital in Jerusalem. What we're talking about today is probably the good news story for Jerusalem. Petros, what was the key message that came out of the conference?
Look, Brian, we are all talking about competitive economies, about new technologies, digital markets, and so on and so forth. Israel is the neighbor of the European Union, of Europe. So we have excellent access to startups, new development, new technologies which have been produced and are produced in, directly speaking, in Jerusalem. And for us, it's an opportunity, to use it to bridge those startups with the great market, a market of 500 million, market which needs new developments, new technologies, and this is an access, access for those technologies to be applied on the European Union markets. And I see a great move, a great possibility for us, to match our possibilities, needs and opportunities in order to be really much more competitive and to increase more cooperation in many fields, not just new technologies, but research and development, human contact. So that's why today it was an interesting, very concise session of talking about different aspects of this process, and I'm looking forward in future to expand this.
Dana Holstein-Mann, the European Union partners a lot with Israel in many different areas, and that's an ongoing negotiation, as we're very aware. But today, the European Commission announced a lot more funding for innovation in particular. Israel is an innovation partner with Europe. You're from a venture capital background. What do you expect in terms of partnerships, and Jerusalem being a startup revolution in this region as well? What's the future for innovation with Europe and Israel?
Well, the truth is that many Israeli companies are already benefiting from programs like Horizon 2020, and recently the next phase of this program was announced, and I think even more Israeli startups will benefit from it. And through this program, more and more Israeli startups are increasing their activity in Europe, and it works in both directions. So programs like that are pulling Israeli companies to collaborate more in Europe, and individual countries are also setting up things like that. The UK embassy has set up a tech hub that helps startups from Israel find new business and new collaboration in the UK. I'd like to see more countries create programs like that are more targeted and focused on specific verticals, specific markets. And also, Israel is known as the startup nation in so many industries. So in cybersecurity and agriculture and medical.
And it's big brand names as well, things that people use every day, Skype, for example, and Intel. These are people aware that these are Israeli companies or the technology comes from Israel?
I'd like to think people are, but I don't think they are enough. There are more than 160, I believe, multinationals that have set up R&D centers in Israel. But there are more industries that are not yet aware of Israel being the startup nation, one of them being the industry I'm in, which is assistive technology. I'm learning to my surprise that companies that are the leading manufacturers of wheelchairs and prosthetics and walkers and things like that don't turn to Israel for innovation. And I think they're missing out on that. With activity within the assistive technology, as an example, growing exponentially over the past couple of years in Israel, I do believe that we'll see more collaboration in that industry. And I think there are other industries that we can identify that are sort of a blue ocean for Israel and European collaboration.
Alex Benjamin, when we talk about Israel and business, we're usually talking about the boycotting, the disinvestment and the sanctions. Why do you see this as a changing narrative? Or is Israel up against a brick wall when it comes to dealing with Europe?
It can be, but equally, let's take a step back. Under the last commission, Barroso was clear he wanted to make Europe the most dynamic, knowledge-based economy in the world by 2020. Now there's some serious lag behind on that. We're 2 years away. So Israel is a leader, as we've discussed, in high tech and innovation. Jerusalem has transformed itself in a few short years to one of the leading hubs in the world. So Europe has a choice. It can even get into old, stale political arguments, which aren't going to be solved in the short to medium term, or it can put the politics aside, and say, look, there are so many areas for cooperation. We're already cooperating under the framework. We're already doing fantastic work on Horizon 2020. Let's develop that further to our mutual betterment. And it seems like it's a win-win for everyone. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel on the peace process, let's focus on what we're good at and where we can cooperate together and operate on that basis.
Despite the BDS movement, opinion polls recently published as well show that the majority of Palestinians want to work with Israel when it comes to business as well. Why do you have on one side so much animosity and yet this willingness to cooperate on the other?
Well, you have this big disconnect. I mean, there was a recent example, Brian, of SodaStream, which was located in a settlement. And BDS made a big deal about it and said, let's boycott SodaStream. SodaStream being a business, they just said, listen, okay, we don't want any trouble, we're just going to move our business. The number one people that suffered in that were the Palestinian workers. Locals. And they said, and of course it's very difficult for them to speak out against their local leadership, but speaking to a lot of them, they've actually said, listen, the worst thing that ever happened to us was BDS. It means I haven't got a job now, and if I do want a job, I need to travel into Israel, which isn't always easy. So their aims are counterproductive in the long run.
Jerusalem is this startup hub that's really transformed itself. You live in Jerusalem. Why did this happen so quickly? What was the embryo for this?
Well, it has been a few decades of things in the works, but it has sort of exploded over the past 5 years. And I think that's when the government, the municipality, the Ministry of Jerusalem and Heritage, and the Jerusalem Development Authority identified what had been going on a grassroots level in the city and began to support it with initiatives like JNEX, with major funding announcements towards high tech in Jerusalem, towards employees, and it was the perfect storm. It was the perfect moment for those two to collide. And there are a bunch of characteristics in Jerusalem that are a reason for this, but that's a whole other topic.
Okay, Petros Stavisias, what can Europe learn from the Jerusalem experience, this startup boom which really took place very recently?
Well, I think first of all, we should learn from Israel on many fronts. First of all, on this high tech and startups. Definitely, we can't copy-paste the experience the Israelis have. But nevertheless, I think having many programs, Horizon 2020 and further on, well, bilateral cooperation, we should take the best examples, best technologies, implement in Europe, establish hubs like in Vilnius, for example. We have so many recently established Israeli high-tech companies, and we are developing further on. I mean, there is
Vilnius is working in fintech as well. It's a real
yes, indeed. It's one of the European hubs for fintech. We made very friendly regulatory environment. Our institutions are working hand in hand with the investors, already present and coming. So that's why I think Europe needs dynamic. We need new technologies, and this is a great partnership which should be utilized to the final point as soon as possible.
Okay. Dana, last year you took part in this similar exercise here in Brussels. Do you see any change in attitude, a movement, a new dynamic?
I do. I did see that this year we had more of the local tech community participate, and it was fascinating to see the different types of investment entities that participate in the event. You had funds, you had angel networks. I think what we were hearing from members of parliament and from other representatives here from the different countries, and the level of interest in hearing what we had to say and learning from what we bring and from our experience, but in a way that can be applied locally, has increased. There has been a shift since last year.
Okay. And finally, Alex Benjamin, if you're to sell this as a political narrative, is it of any use to the potential of a peace process? Do you see this as just a business transaction, or is the politics going to take a positive spin?
I mean, the politics should take a positive spin. Jerusalem is in the headlines for not necessarily the right reasons, but it is, at the back of it all, once you strip the politics away, a dynamic, innovative place. So I think once you take away the staid old narratives which are driving Europe's attitude towards Israel, you remove those, there's so much more scope for, there's so much more potential for cooperation. And that's the kind of issues that we're interested in developing, the soft power issues, the areas where Israel and Europe can cooperate together. Let's, as somebody said very nicely today at the conference, no politics, let's just get the business done.
Alex Benjamin, Petros Davicius, Dana Holston-Mann, thank you. I'm
you.
Brian McGuire.